And legal contributor Paul Callan and defense attorney Rachel Self joining me now. Good to see both of you.
Good to see you.
So
Good to see you.
So we thought we'd be talking about one Pistorius case involving the killing of a woman, but we're talking about two now members of the family. So I wonder, Paul, you first, now that we're learning a bit more about Carl Pistorius and this homicide case, will these two cases, Oscar and Carl, will these two cases kind of be intertwined? Will they influence one another?
Well, this is bizarre, Frederica. You know, with the brother under arrest, Hilton Botha, the chief investigator in Oscar Pistorius' case, charged with murder. It seems like everybody connected with the case is facing criminal charges. You know, the question about whether it will ultimately affect the case is a hard one to answer. If this were a jury trial situation, I would say yes. I would say people on a jury might say, hey, if one brother's bad, maybe the other's bad. But in South Africa, a decision is made by a judge or what they call a magistrate, and presumably he's well educated enough and sophisticated enough not to hold the actions of one brother against another. So I think we have to assume the best and say no, it won't affect the ultimate outcome.
And Rachel, I wonder what else is different about how cases will be prosecuted there in South Africa versus what we're accustomed to here in the U.S., where people are innocent until proven, guilty, and the burden of proof is on the prosecution. Are there any real parallels in how it will be adjudicated there?
Well, yes, there are. In fact, the most important thing, I think, is that the prosecution is going to need to prove their case beyond a reasonable doubt. That standard is the same over there. But the thing that's going to be very interesting to me as I follow this case is going to be the fact that the judge hearing the case probably lives in one of these gated or secured communities, him or herself. And he is used to this fear culture that exists in South Africa. And I'm just blown away. I've been on the edge of my seat since the beginning of this whole thing started. And I'm just blown away by the fact that, we've got all of these people that think that it's okay to shoot first and ask questions later. Appears to be the way that it is down there. You've got people with drop gates in their homes. Their own security forces is a very common thing over there. So we're all listening to this as Americans, but we don't understand necessarily the South African fear culture.
Sure. Well, it speaks to the culture there in South Africa. And so, how this information is assessed and how it's received will be very different than what people are accustomed to here in the U.S., Paul. But what seems to be expected is that it would be assessed perhaps in the same way it might be here, the dynamics of the case, the evidence collected, the makeup of the room or the structure of the house, what could have plausibly happened as it pertains to the story that Oscar Pistorius has given. And he gave that story in detail through this affidavit. Will that affidavit help support, the defense, or will the defense find itself trying to backpedal or kind of clean up the story?
Well, I think his story is so patently ridiculous that defense attorneys probably are going to try to make a better presentation in front of a judge. And, in fairness to South Africa, we've got some situations in Florida with the stand your ground laws and whatnot where people say Americans are using guns rather needlessly as well. Of course, we'll see how that trial turns out in Florida. But getting back to the facts of the case, from a common sense standpoint, this is a circumstantial evidence case, which just means there's no eyewitness testimony. But here, Oscar Pistorius walks by a bed in which his girlfriend is sleeping, says he didn't notice that she wasn't there, but he managed to reach under the bed and pull out an automatic weapon, and he goes back, or a semi-automatic weapon, he goes into the bathroom then and opens fire through the door.
Maybe in this case.
Well, I'd like to see what would happen if Rachel Self walks into her condo in Boston and opens fire in the bathroom door. She'd be led away in handcuffs based on circumstantial evidence. No witnesses required. Go ahead, Rachel.
Rachel, is this going to be a big problem?
Not necessarily.
Lack of eyewitness accounts?
Well, I thank you very much, Paul. I assure you I'm not planning on walking into my apartment in Boston and opening fire. But right, I do believe there's major problems with the prosecution's case here. It's all circumstantial. And Paul, he didn't walk by anywhere. He was apparently he hadn't put on his prosthetic feet yet, and he was apparently going out to the balcony to bring the fan in, and he was at a different level than the bed would have been at. So it's entirely possible that he didn't see her in the bed. And then he hears what he thinks is an intruder in this fear culture. And let's remember remember he's only 26 years old, and he's in this fear culture that he lives in, where he had been told before that a workman had left a ladder by an unbarred window, and it was possible someone was in there. And yes, I do not disagree that I think it's a problem that he didn't go knock, 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 honey, are you in there, before he opened fire. But I think that reasonable doubt is going to be able to be established by the process. It would have been nice, but reasonable doubt is going to be able to be established by the prosecution. The question.
Here's the real question. If his girlfriend is behind that door and he's yelling to an intruder, get out of my house, or he's yelling to her, why wouldn't she have said to him, hey, honey, it's me. Are you flipping out tonight? He has her saying nothing, and then he opens fire. He didn't.
No.
She didn't hear him.
Here's what I think is a plausible. Here's what I think is a plausible defense to that, Paul. If she went into the bathroom when he initially, according to his affidavit, came in from the balcony, thought he heard an intruder, and said, "Call the police," to her, it's entirely possible he didn't realize she was in the bathroom, and she was in the bathroom, heard him yell, thought he was in a different part of the house, and was hiding from the intruder herself, thinking, "I better stay quiet. There might be an intruder here." So there are so many different versions that the defense is going to be. It's just what's your imagination say today?
Well, you're giving him the benefit of a very sophisticated analysis here. But I think in the end, Frederica, it's either a premeditated intentional homicide or he's not going to walk, because it's a reckless homicide if it's not. Because anybody who opens fire into a bathroom door like that, not knowing who's behind the door, is guilty of manslaughter in any civilized country in the world. In South Africa, they will call it culpable homicide. So one way or another, Pistorius, I think, is in deep trouble, even if Rachel Self is defending him. Okay, so, and the other thing I wanted to say is, what people have to understand also is Mr. Pistorius got the benefit of a very favorable decision before the current magistrate. Under the South African system, a higher court now can look at this, and it won't necessarily be the same magistrate. Okay. So after a period of 6 months or so, we may see a new trial.
Well, I don't necessarily think that that's true. I mean, this is such an interesting situation, and we're all looking at it through our state of mind and what we've seen before. And this is unlike anything that I've ever seen before, for sure. And what is the subjective state of mind of Oscar Pistorius? What is the subjective state of mind of somebody living in a gated community in this fear culture? What's the subjective state of mind of somebody who's as famous as he is? Okay, there have been reports saying that he is as important to South Africa right now in the emerging new South Africa as Nelson Mandela was to today's youth as far as inspiration goes. And he is a very, very famous person, and it's possible that he is more of a target than the average Joe.
I got to tell you, Rachel, Nelson Mandela was locked up in prison for about 20 years and had a lot of reason to hate and maybe open fire on his enemies. And I never remember him firing a gun at somebody when he got out of prison. So if Oscar Pistorius is being compared by the South African populace to Nelson Mandela, we better start shipping some psychotropic medications over there. I don't think that's the case. I don't think that's the case.
No,
and I think ultimately a judge is going to apply good common sense. Yep. and find the right thing here. Yep.
Yeah, no, the judge absolutely is going to do that. But the thing that we're going to see here is a very different play of events than what we're used to seeing in the United States, I think. I mean, it's just going to, I mean, they have less than a 10% conviction rate in South Africa.
Well, I have to agree with you there, Rachel. Yeah, it's very true. And, you know, there is a fear culture in South Africa. There are demographics and dynamics going on there that are very different from here. For instance, there's no death penalty in South Africa. Why no death penalty? Eliminated because, essentially, prior to the elimination of apartheid, they had the highest hanging rate on the earth. Everybody was being hung, and of course it was the majority, you know, the black people who live in that country who were being oppressed. So there are things going on in courtrooms there and fears, I think, that we don't see in this country. So it's not fair to judge the system by American standards. I agree with you there, Rachel.
But Paul, you know what I want to see? I want to see all of the forensic evidence come out. I can't wait to see whether he was dressed when he came down the stairs, whether she was dressed when she came down the stairs, what he was wearing, whether there was a blood alcohol level for either of them, whether there, you know, all of this stuff that we just don't know yet as it unfolds is definitely going to sway which way this case goes.
Well, thank you very much, Rachel. And this case is going to be one of the most closely followed criminal cases, I think, in the world in the months to come. So we'll be following it closely here at CNN.